So one thing, Vince, at one point you shared that winning was a journey of integrity. Can you please explain what you mean by that?
It's being able to do that which is required of us to the best of our abilities. And sometimes our best is not nearly as good as compared to someone else's. But we are so results oriented in this country and maybe around the world. And during the Paris Olympics, there's going to be all these, how many medals did we win today? You know, what's our medal count? Did we win? That's the standard question I get when they find out I was in the Olympic Games was, did you win? Or they soften the question a little bit by going, how'd you do? Which means, did you win? And so to me, the Olympic Games, I did not win. I placed 15th in the Olympics. And it wasn't until hindsight, looking back, that I realized how extraordinary that journey was. And I honestly left nothing on the table. There wasn't anything more I think I could have done. And that is the highest gold standard, I think, in terms of integrity, to execute in that way.
This mindset that you have, do you think it's one that you came to kind of individually just through living? Do you think it was informed by your upbringing? How did you come to these conclusions that you did?
First thought that came to mind was at 14 when my parents taught us or took us to a transcendental meditation course. And then everything changed for me. I was just all of a sudden taking a step back and just meditating. I think of meditation as kind of a smart snow globe, where if life is like we're shaking it, and then when we stop shaking it, these flakes start to float down, and I call those smart flakes, where these smart flakes fall into place of where they need to be by taking that step back and meditating. So that was my first thought. And the upbringing, definitely my parents, I give them credit because they were constantly introducing us to new stuff. And also at 16, a friend had passed away. And I was 16, she was 17, Jill Kudrick, it was May. And sitting at the funeral, all of us teenagers had the same realization that there was mortality, that, wait, there might not live forever. And I do remember thinking, well, there's urgency. I got to try everything at least once. So that played into it as well.
What did learning your talents answer for you?
Well, like many people, I've taken a lot of the personality assessments, but this was the first one that had me go, aha, because when seeing all those 4 quadrants, I said, yeah, I know, right? I mean, it just seems to be, if you want some video edited, I can do that. If you want something fixed, I can do that. If you want something written, I can do that. If you want somebody to just listen, and I can do that. I mean, so it just was a affirmation that that I had those capabilities inherent, rather than having to work at them to overcome a weakness or something like that. And not for a second am I saying, please don't let me come across as saying I don't have weaknesses.
So what would you tell yourself, your younger self, then, knowing what you know now?
I would definitely say follow those activities that give you energy. Give me energy. If it sucks you dry, if I feel depleted having done something, then consider that a lesson. It's a concept I call soul taps. And a soul tap is when something happens. Some people call them signs. I just call it a something to say, pay attention, because this is worth awareness, or worth having an understanding of it, not figuring it out at the time, coming up with some magical or mystical answer why a butterfly came through the window and, oh, that's my dead grandmother. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just being aware, awareness. And if a butterfly comes through the window and you were thinking about your grandma at the time who had passed away, the soul tap might mean something much more profound than just, attributing it to her passing,
So on that note, let's say a new idea has fascinated you, okay, and you've decided to dig into it or to pursue it.
Right.
What do you do in the next 5 days or the next month?
That's actually pretty simple. It's a good idea won't go away. And if I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking about it, that's a soul tap to pay attention. If it's the last thing I'm thinking about, if it's something when I'm talking to somebody else about it, I've got one right now that scares the hell out of me. But it's being able to take online learning and customize it specific. And I've already talked to Candace about this, to be able to bring in core clarity, for example, have the objectives of the company, the objectives of the individual and their strengths, and then the actual online learning course, because online learning is a one size fits all. That what the national average I read recently is 6% of online learning is completed. 94% of the time, people aren't finishing because they don't get energy from it, because all sorts of reasons, and probably one size does not fit all. To be able to take artificial intelligence now and grab the objectives from the company, grab the personality learning styles, a visual learner, whatever, the kinds of things that give that person energy, and then the material in that online learning and synthesize it into a specific learning platform. I wake up in the morning thinking about this. I go to bed, I think about it.
Athlete being in this Olympic season, are you just happy? Are you just energized? Like what kind of energy, what kind of state of mind are you in during this season?
Oh gosh, great question. A lot of this experience during the Olympic Games is nostalgia, flashing back to certain stories, what it felt like before the opening ceremonies, during the opening ceremonies. Our event was the last 3 days of the Olympic program. So attending the other sports, seeing the other athletes, running into people from around the world, the experience in the athletes' village, you could just tell which athletes had already competed. That was for sure. And the ones that hadn't yet. A lot of nostalgia, flashbacks. It's so interesting. Being a father, an Olympian, all three of my kids convinced until the age of maybe 17, 18 that I was a complete dork. And the Olympics would come on. I said, okay, finally evidence that dad's not a dork. And they would just glance at it and go, no, you're a dork. Yeah, 20 years old. I took, well, I packed a 4-year education into 6 years. And part of that reason for that was to take a year off, and ended up traveling around the world for an entire year, sending back letters. Instead of writing my own travel diary, the letters home were the diary. I'd also send home undeveloped rolls of film to my family to develop. So I never saw the film from the trip until till I got back, but they got to read the letters and see the photos. And this became kind of lore in our family. And our youngest, Isabella, 23 years old, and she had the idea for a couple of years prior, probably from age 21, 22, saying, I want to do the same thing. She graduates with a film degree and ends up doing a documentary, is doing a documentary. She was capturing the film. She just got back, I think, 10 days ago from this world trip. And the documentary is called In My Father's Footsteps. She will take the assets of all of the photos, all the letters. She followed the same journey, more or less. She did some offshoots. She did things I didn't even think of. She met the Dalai Lama. She jumped out of a plane, parachuted. I did the same thing. My second jump, the parachute didn't open. That's another story. And anyway, so Bella did this world trip and is now going through the process of grabbing the pieces of, let's say, 1,000 hours of video and still content. And she wrote letters home and putting together a documentary on that's going to be 90 minutes. And the working title right now for her, the subtitle is Discovering Connection in a Hyperconnected World. Connection is very, very important to her. And I think really everyone, I mean, if we're not connected personally, if we're not connected physically, if we're not going out our front door to connect, it can be an empty experience versus a very rich experience by connecting with somebody in the northern reaches of India or the southernmost part of New Zealand. And the people that make those stories even richer could not be happier that she took that trip. I mean, just such a feeling of fulfillment beyond pride. I don't take pride for it because she's the one that did it. And she's a single female, right? You know, traveling around the world. That's something else. So in my father's footsteps.org.
Well, The Ant and the Elephant, when I read it, it was just, for me, I was working on the CoreClarity work at that point. And it was very early on. It was just in the first 2 years, 3 years from taking the assessment and starting the company. And I realized in Vince's description of it that there was so much tied to CoreClarity, because the ant is on a journey and there's a wise owl that helps him through this journey. But the whole analogy in the story comes down to how many synaptic connections in your brain there are in your conscious brain. You know, the things that you know, there might be some air hitting your face, or it's cold or warm, you know, whatever the visceral sensations that you feel and what you're thinking of actively. There's about 2,000 neurons, I think it was, Vince, that are firing every second of time. Yeah. And at that same moment, over 4 billion synaptic connections are firing in your subconscious. And the talents reside in our subconscious. And the problem is, when we don't know we have them, how do we use them? It's like, you know, getting a new appliance of some sort without an instruction manual. That's how we're born. We are not born with instruction manuals, and we should be, because it really helps to figure out, oh, if somebody pushes this button, that's going to happen. You know, how many times does somebody push your buttons until you realize maybe I shouldn't react that way, because there's something they're hitting. So this whole ant and the elephant idea, it's brilliant because it's so easily, effortlessly communicated with Vince's communication strategically, so that people get this, oh, you know, I need to pay attention to this stuff. And so the tie-in with CoreClarity for me was instantaneous in the beginning. And I read another book, The Age of Speed. The way I met Vince actually was I was reading The Age of Speed, and I was like, oh, this is such a good book. And I'm going, man, this guy's got self-assurance. This, you know, I didn't know Vince. I didn't know where he lived. I had no information about the author because I just pick up books and read them. And I'm like, oh, and I think he's got this, and I think he's got this. And I am in the car with my husband finishing the book. I close it up and my phone rings. It was a Soul Tap call from a gentleman by the name of Steve Strauss, who was my business coach at that point, a dear friend who I was sharing all my research with and information, and allowed him to utilize the CoreClarity database early on. And I said, he said, his first question, hey, Candace, what's going on? You know, what are you up to? I said, oh, I just finished this amazing book. It's called The Age of Speed. Have you ever heard of it? He goes, yeah, I've got it. I'm like, okay, you know, I was reading it and I'm like, oh, this guy's got this and this and this. And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out, how can I get his talents? And there's this long pause, and Steve says, well, do you ever think to look in your database? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, Vince is one of my friends and clients, and he's in the database. And I was like, oh my gosh, you've got it. You've got it. You've got to interview. You have to introduce me to him. It's all of us just full on. I've got to talk to this guy because it was so in alignment with everything that we were doing. And it was so beautifully told in so few words that a fifth grader would get it.
How many books have you written now, Vince?
9, working on
9.
number 10 right now. Yep.
And what's do you want to share a little bit about what the 10th one is about, or?
Sure. It's so funny, Candace. You kept trying to call it the speed of age.
No.
And
well, I was thinking the speed of trust, because the speed of trust came out about the same time.
It did. But the next book, it's called The Speed of Age.
Oh.
Wow.
There's a soul tap for you. Now you have to get it done.
Yeah. It's about, it's hiring young talent. Great. Don't stop doing that. But don't discount somebody with, 4 decades of experience and say, well, they might be more expensive, or that person may only work here for 10 years or 5 years before they retire, or what's retirement. But that to accelerate the outcomes, that the age piece can be such a massive advantage. And there's all sorts of examples in sport, in the medical industry, just corporate America, corporate world. It'll be along the lines of a Malcolm Gladwell type book, where you get to the end and you realize there is no solution, but you know more. So, yeah, he drives me crazy. You read his book, and it's like, that's so interesting, and then you hope at the end he gives you the magic formula. You say, no, it doesn't exist. But the tipping point is there. It is a concept book, so that's the goal.
Okay, Vince, what's a song you love?
So I like a lot of songs, but the first one that comes to mind, and it's one not everybody has heard of, but it's a Kenny Loggins song called Conviction of the Heart. And he starts at where are the dreams we once had and goes on from there. And I can maybe get stuck in my head being very cerebral, and a conviction of the heart is the synthesis of the head and the body working in tandem. I call it the emotional buzz. When a thought creates a physical reaction, that's the one worth paying attention to. So
we know you love skiing. We know you recreational skiing, downhill skiing, maybe still speed skiing. What other sport do you love?
Oh, easy. Hockey. I am from Canada, and I still play men's hockey. Took a break there for a bit to get my hip replaced, but love hockey. Just such a great sport, way to stay fit, and the connection with others, to have that connection with everybody, the guys in the dressing room, and just afterwards we go for a beer. It's just beer league hockey is my true love, more than skiing.
You've talked about a lot of different times that have happened in your life. Can you think of a time when you stabilized a situation and you didn't realize it until after it was over? I mean, I think of the Salman Rushdie story, that you stabilized that. I am sure your communication, your command, and strategic communication looks like command on top of that. So it's like you get this double dose of command. I imagine, that took over in that situation. But can you think of another situation where maybe that happened in your life that you hadn't thought about it before you realized you were a stabilizer?
Well, my instinct wants me to answer with a setting where I was a stabilizer in an organization of sorts. I organized the Alberta Olympic Academy, and I was 23, 24, 25, 26. I would have been about 25 years old when I was doing that. And looking back, I went, what the hell was I thinking? All these, people are well established in the Olympic hierarchy. And here I was just marching ahead and creating this Olympic Academy, but brought in kids from all over the province and talked about the principles of Olympism. And it was something that I led, and it continued on after I was gone, or I'd left Alberta. So that's the first one that comes to mind. And in an isolated situation, it would have been when my parachute did not open, the second jump out of a plane. A lot of things had to kick in and being very strategic. And one of them was where the reserve chute ring was. And I'd done repeated training that morning. So I knew where the yellow ring was, and went through the procedure, and the reserve chute came out. And then I managed to hit the ground much slower than as it was playing out. So
people offer compliments throughout our lives. What is one of those compliments that you've received that really resonated with you? When did you hear it? What was the background story?
favorite compliment is the most recent ones, because they just come at such a magical time. There's a lady who works with the veterans, and she was talking about a book I wrote called The Earthquake. And it's part 2 of the ant and the elephant who go through an earthquake. And I almost answered, "What's your favorite book?" And it's The Earthquake, because it's such an important lesson, that the opening line in The Earthquake is, "There's no linear way out of chaos," which is antithetical to how I live my life. Everything's linear, isn't it? Isn't there a sequence of things? Isn't there a prescriptive formula? But when we go through a personal earthquake, losing a job, losing getting bankrupt, going bankrupt, losing a child, divorce, any kind of personal earthquake is chaotic. I mean, this chaos means that there's no linear way out of this. And so I would say that the compliment that I got, that she said helps these veterans who have come into her office, she hands them the book and they come back, tears in their eyes, because it impacted them so greatly in terms of how to get out of this post-service experience, how to transition in a way that has them thrive rather than just survive or cope. That was a great call to get. So that's the most recent one is my favorite.
What is a final message you want to leave our audience?
Final message I'd like to leave everyone is something that I think if you ask my kids, they would tell you, never make a decision based on fear. Fear is going to stand in the way. Fear is going to be an inhibitor. John Amat says, he's a mountain climber, first Canadian to summit Mount Everest, said, when you run away from fear, it gets larger. When you go towards it, it gets smaller. So never make a decision based on fear.
We really appreciate you being here and hearing about your Olympic experience as well as those soul taps. So thank you very much. And should our audience want to learn more, where should they go?
My website will take you to everything you'd want, is vinceposcente.com.
Please hit the like button and comment below with what resonated with you from our guest story today. To help unlock the mystery of your history, click the link below.
That is Authority of One. Our goal is to help shatter those myths that other people put in your head about you as you were growing up and even as you've been an adult, so that you can clearly see how amazing you are and really understand yourself.